Thank you for staying with us. You're still watching The Breakfast on Plus TV Africa. Right now, we'll be discussing the impact of public debt on economic growth. Vice President Kashim Shettima has called for a strategic approach to public debt, urging Nigeria to view it as a tool for economic growth rather than a burden. Speaking at the inauguration of the Supervisory Board of the Debt Management Office, DMO, in Abuja, he emphasized the need for prudent debt management to support infrastructure development and poverty reduction. As board chair, Shettima tasked members with formulating effective policies to ensure long-term debt sustainability, in line with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's Renewed Hope agenda. He stressed that responsible borrowing can drive economic stability and national growth when properly managed. Reaffirming the government's commitment to fiscal discipline, Shettima maintained that Nigeria's debt strategy must prioritize development and sustainability. He insisted that with the right policies, debt can be a catalyst for progress rather than a financial liability. Joining us this morning is Gbolahan Olojede. He's a finance expert. Good morning, sir. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning. Nice to be on the program.
Yeah. All right. I think let's start with what your take is on the vice president's statement, because, of course, we as Nigerians know how much we're owing. We're owing a whole lot of money. And every other month or every other year, we're looking at getting new loans. In fact, I think just last month, we still tried to get secure more loans as well. But what he's saying is we can look at it as, a catalyst for growth, economic growth, rather than financial liability. What's your take on that?
Okay. Whether your loan will be a liability and will burden you, or whether it will be an asset and a tool for transformation, depends on what you use the loan for. And that is at the heart of it. If you borrow money and you deploy it into wasteful segments of your economy, or you just disburse it anyhow, then you're not going to get anything from it. But if you borrow money and you invest it in assets that will earn, assets that will transform the business space, assets that will transform the way the people live their lives, then you are converting that liability, or you're making use of that liability to create a valuable asset. I think probably that is what the vice president is trying to say, and that is he's right and the money right there. All the countries in the world that we look up to, that we like to compare ourselves with, they do some borrowing, but borrowing recklessly, borrowing without considering repayment plans, borrowing without allocating it to the right project and ensuring we make the best out of those projects is what is a problem. Borrowing in itself is not a problem.
I like the fact that you said that with that, saying it depends on what you do with it. So if you want it to be an asset, or if you want it to be a liability, it depends on, maybe the projects that you're using the money for. But sadly, we've seen that in this case in Nigeria, most times they're borrowing just to splurge on certain things. So we're not really seeing the development here right now. But for you, what are some things that you think they need to be looking at, especially if they want to move forward, or if we want to move forward as a nation and develop our nation? What are some ways that you think even the DMO, because they're the ones who are managing this, how can they balance borrowing and economic stability?
Well, DMO is an agency of government managing the debt. But you see, when government comes to DMO and says, I need more money, or I need money, DMO can only advise and say, look, this is what we already borrowed, these are the interest implications, this is the burden, therefore I will advise to do this or to do that. But you see, that is just an advice, and it still behoves on the government to want to take that advice on, or to just give a matching order and say, okay, just go out there and get me some money, and he has no option. He has to go out there and get money. However, we all have to be involved in one way or the other. Because you see these borrowings, number one, they are approved by the representatives of the people. The National Assembly are theoretically the representatives of the people. The debt, the borrowing are presented before them. They are meant to review it and ask the necessary questions. Some of the important questions are, number one, should we even borrow this particular amount we want to borrow? Which means, is there another way of funding what we want to fund? That is a fundamental question. Number two, if we must borrow, where should this particular borrowing stand on the list of our priorities? Who should we borrow from? What is this borrowing meant to be deployed to? What is the interest rate on this borrowing? The commercial borrowing, the grant? It is at that level that all those questions are asked before these borrowing plans are approved. So when borrowings are at those levels, we also have a duty as citizens, as civil society organizations, to find a way to be part of those discussions, to raise issues that are our concern, and ensure that the representative of the people will not approve a loan that we believe is not in the best interest of this country. We've had loans that have been deployed properly. The Lagos-Ibadan rail, for example, and the rail is there, it's working. Some of the other rail projects as well, Abuja, Kaduna, and the rest of them were low. They were deployed. The projects are there and they're working. There are some that are properly done and are delivering on dividends to the people. There are also those that were more like you borrow money, you carry it on a chopper, and then you start spraying it from the chopper. Whoever can grab whatever they can grab. We also have those kind of loans. So it is in the place of getting more involved by the people, by their representative and civil liberty organizations, civil society organizations, individuals, at those points when those loans are being approved by the people.
So you said some of them have worked. For instance, the railway project to Ibadan, Lagos, Abuja, Kaduna. But if we look at the ratio, to the ones that you put it on a chopper, you start to, just spray it around. Where do you think Nigeria stands with our own debt management at the moment?
I have some, what I might call a conspiracy theory about some of the people that we borrow from. I believe that some of the people that we even borrow money from, they don't want us to be able to repay the money, which is why they are not bothered about what you use the money for. They just want to give you money. So they know that you are owing them. You will pay anyway. So they don't care whether what you use the money for eventually pay off for you or not. They know that you can't run away. You will still have to pay them their money. That is why it is in that place of querying or questioning the purposes for which this money are being used. I don't think we have done well enough in it. I have reviewed borrowing plans in the past, and I've seen items that I'm asking myself, why must we borrow to do this and to do that and to do that? So it means that some of the items on those lists are not things we should borrow for. And come to think of it, you have instances in which some lenders will say, come and collect this money. When you collect this money, just go and share it to the poor in the society. And people have been asking consistently, where is the database of these people that want to share the money? I'm not saying there is no database. My advocacy about database of the poor in Nigeria is that it should be independently validated. Independent validation can happen. There are institutions that could help us to say, look, this is 774 local government. These are the samples of some names from each of these local government, and they will validate it and ensure that, this data is reliable. But where those things have not been done, And we are borrowing money and sharing it to people that we are not even so sure if some of these people exist or not. Anything whatsoever, any program that involves sharing cash requires transparency because it is cash we're talking about. Yeah. I don't think we have done well enough. So you can imagine borrowing money for such purposes. It is ridiculous, in my opinion, and we can do a follow.
Yeah. So you mentioned the fact that some of the people who even lend us the money, they are not bothered whether we pay back or not. But there have been some. They want you to pay back, but they don't care what you use the money for, as long as you're not running away from them. Hello, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. So another concern that people have is the debt servicing costs. How do you think the government, because especially if they're borrowing for things like, sharing to the poor, there's obviously going to be some costs allocated to that. How do you think the government needs to manage these challenges, especially if we don't want our liability, or even though we're to look at it as assets, but we don't want that to be so high and that it gets to unsustainable levels?
We already have a huge burden because when you look at the debt service amount in our budget, it is contesting with the infrastructure, with the capital budget for the same year. So where capital budget is 100 naira, you also see debt servicing as 100 naira, probably even more sometimes. So it is telling that we are crossing the boundary, and that a lot of money that should have gone into our development is being spent on debt service. Now, that space is not as straightforward as it could be. And the reason is because if you need money and there is no shortcut for you to get that money, the only thing you can do is to borrow. So we must take a medium to long-term perspective so that we can begin to amend and correct our ways as far as the burden of borrowing is concerned. Because in the short term, it is difficult to fix. But when you take a medium-term perspective and you understand, for example, that our revenues is tiny, let me share a piece of information with you, for example. The education budget of South Africa is an equivalent of 25 trillion naira. That is about half of our entire budget.
Yeah.
That is education. And you are talking of South Africa that is 60 million people. Nigeria, we are told we are over 200. So it tells you that our budget as it is today and our revenue level is extremely tiny. It is too tiny. So part of the reasoning that we must be considering right now is how we must grow that revenue level. When you grow your revenue level, it will also help you to reduce your borrowing and reduce the percentage of your spending that comes from borrowing.
I love that.
So,
yeah. So what are some strategies that you think we can use right now to, increase our revenue? Because if that's a huge factor, that's definitely what our focus should be on right now to help reduce the borrowing. So what are some strategies you think would come in handy at the moment?
Let's make the best of our natural resources. We are blessed with oil and gas immensely. But as we have all noted, we're not even producing enough. We are not able to meet our own quota of those things. So we need to do better. We have more gas than oil. What are we making out of gas? Two. We have commercial quantities of lithium. Where is our 10-year, 20-year plan for lithium, which might eventually replace a chunk of the fossil fuel deployment to vehicles across the world? So where is our own plan? So that is on some of the natural resource issues. Then we must industrialize. I'm delighted about what has happened over the last couple of years in the refining, in the refining of oil in Nigeria with the Dangote refiner. Hopefully, we can also have all those public refineries come into that place. That is on the industrialization side of things. We cannot continue to be a country that exports commodities. We must be able to do way beyond commodities by being able to add value. That is the space of industrialization. So our manufacturing, our industrial industries must work. When they work, we are able to produce, we consume. Government is able to take taxes. You tax income. You can't tax people if they are not able to make money. So industrializing, making the best out of our natural resources and making the best out of our human resources. When you think about countries like US, like China, like India, like Brazil, Indonesia, there is something common to all the business environment so that businesses can thrive. When businesses thrive, we cannot tax income. You can't tax businesses when they are not making money. So we need the businesses to do well so that government can also make revenues. For instance, the VAT income alone in South Africa is bigger than the retained revenue of FGN. So we have to, but then you can't just go there and be taxing folks. These people you're going to tax must be able to make money when they are good and they are doing well. Then you can come and say, "Oh God, give me little too, and let's be able to use it to support what you're doing." That is how it works. Then we have a huge population, and we should make it count. US has a large population. China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, all these places, they have huge population, and they have been able to make their population to count for them. We must be able to move our own population from being a burden to being an asset. We have a huge young population, energy everywhere, mental energy, physical energy. How are we harnessing, harvesting this energy and deploying them productively to grow this nation? That is at the heart of what we must also do. I remember some years ago, we suddenly found Mark Zuckerberg at Sabo in Lagos, entering cyber cafe to cyber. He didn't even go to Abuja to go and greet the president or the governor. You know, he went on the street because right where he was sitting, there are reports that show that certain things are happening in a part in Nigeria, and he wants to know what exactly is and how business could be done. I could tap into those opportunities. So what about us? We are the owners of the country where those activities are happening. What are we doing about those activities?
Yeah. So another issue that most Nigerians have is concerns over transparency, and I just wanted to touch on that. How do you think that the government can ensure accountability with whatever we're borrowing, the monies that we borrow? How can even the public, how can we know what we're borrowing? How can we understand it and track it? Because if there is no accountability, if there's no transparency, then we're always going to be in the dark. So how can we even track our borrowings and what they're being spent on?
Okay, I believe we need the civil society organizations. I know an organization like Budget that has been doing a lot in that space. We need to have more of those organizations who can help us to pick on budget heads and determine what has been done with those budget heads. And accountability, it makes accountability easy. There's a platform in Texas. I once lived in Texas. And what that platform does is that it places all the infrastructure projects, they are there on the platform. You can know if it has been awarded, what state it is, and all those things.
But yes, I think that's even a great way to land it. We just need to have that level of accountability and transparency with our borrowings. And hopefully, you know, we will start to see the dividends, because borrowing is one thing, but like Gbolahan has rightly said, if it's going to be an asset or a liability, it depends on what you use it for. So I hope that Even when we borrow, we're borrowing to develop our nation, not just to be frivolous with our spending. So let's look for ways to see how we can turn these borrowings, instead of them being a burden, they can become assets for economic growth in Nigeria. Anyways, we're speaking to Gbolahan Olojede, he's a finance expert, and we've just been looking at the impact on public debt on economic growth. We'll go on a short break now. When we return, we'll be discussing the fact that UNICEF calls for digital technology to boost basic education. Please stay with us.